Hi, welcome back to the channel. This is Floating in Books. Today's video is going to be about all of the books that I would recommend reading because it's fall. So let's get kicking. Welcome to everybody. Welcome back. If you have never seen one of my videos, my name is Maaike. I live in the Netherlands. I like to come on here to chat about all things that I cannot fit onto my main channel. And this officially started as a book channel, so I want to keep the book content going. And I thought, why not do a video about fall books? So that's what we're going for. I've got 3 different categories. I have 5 recommendations for you from classics, because I feel if there is going to be a moment in time for you to go into a classic, it's the fall time. I don't know why, but there's just something about like the cozy indoorsiness that I associate with getting stuck into a good classic. The second category is going to be like more like mystery, paranormal, fantasy, magical realism kind of recommendations that I'd like to share with you. And towards the end of the video, I'm going to be sharing 5 books that I personally haven't read yet, but that I would like to maybe read this time. I'm not going to think of it as a TBR because my brain cannot handle TBR, puts too much stress on me. But these are 5 books that are on my shelves that I have, that I think are perfect for fall, that I could also recommend to you. So yes, let's get started with category number 1 first. I've made it a very equal split. I have 5 books in every single category for you. And as I already mentioned in the intro, I think that because the fall is the season where we, you know, don't go outside as much, it's getting a little dark and gloomy, we have perhaps a little bit more time as well, because there's just not that many events going on, to get stuck in something that can be quite meaty as a classic. Now, granted, the classics I'm holding here, I think, are all quite accessible classics. They aren't the most difficult ones to read, to make sure that, you know, whoever it is that's watching this video and gets these recommendations can actually get some use out of this. And I think that a classic that I would recommend if you truly want to get into the fall vibes is Daphne de Maurier's Jamaica Inn. I read this a couple of years ago, and I remember thinking, this is giving me Wuthering Heights vibes, but with a mystery sort of darkness behind it that Wuthering Heights is lacking. I almost put Wuthering Heights on the list, but I feel that this kind of trumps that because this has a bit more going on plot-wise for me. But I feel that atmospherically it's very similar to Wuthering Heights, only it's set in Cornwall. So in case you don't know what this book is about, this is about a girl named Mary who, after her mother passes away, she needs to move in with her aunt and uncle, and they run a place called the Jamaica Inn. And Mary is forced to work there as a barmaid, and she very quickly figures out something fishy is going on here. She doesn't know exactly what, and then in her spare time, she wanders the surroundings of this inn, which is located in Cornwall, right by the ocean. And so you have a lot of like rain and gloomy weather, and she isn't really sure who she can trust, and is she putting her faith in the right people. And at the same time, her aunt and uncle are also a little bit weird. Like, it's almost like an abusive relationship, really, that's going on between the 3 of them. So, and it just turns out that this Jamaica Inn is actually quite, like, possibly one of the biggest, like, one of the meeting points for, like, a criminal syndicate in the end. I'm not really giving away too much there, but yeah, you know something is going on, but what the mystery is at the heart of the book, I'm of course not going to give away. But yeah, this has mystery, intrigue, darkness, gloominess, unreliable characters that are very, very flawed, and then this Mary person has to figure it all out. So I think that this is a perfect read if you want to get into those cozy fall vibes but get stuck in a classic. And because this was written in the 30s, I believe, it's not that inaccessible. It very much draws on like the Wuthering Heights and like gothic-y elements that were popular in like late 19th century fiction, but because it's written in a 1930s style, it feels a bit more modern, and that makes it a lot more readable. If we say fall, we say Edgar Allan Poe, and Edgar Allan Poe is like, it really depends on which stories by him you read, I feel, whether you're gonna get the fall vibes. I think if you read something like The Fall of the House of Usher, or like The Pit and the Pendulum, Telltale Heart, those are like your, you know, eerie sort of, there's always this dark explanation, and it's all about like going mad and things. So those stories I feel are very much Edgar Allan Poe at its best. But not the ones that are about like the kind of detective stories that he wrote as well. So the edition I hold though is from the 70s, and it has all these like weird etchings in. Let me show you. Like, if this isn't going to give you spooky vibes, I mean, I don't know what is. So the stories themselves may not necessarily be very fall vibe-ish all the time, even though like a good detective story, like a mystery thriller kind of thing, in the fall time I do appreciate as well. So I think Edgar Allan Poe can go with the fall vibes for sure, and this edition, most definitely. And then this is perhaps a bit of a wild one, but I thought it was, again, something cozy to read, and as far as classics go, very accessible. I'm talking about Thomas Hardy, Far from the Madding Crowd. And this was one of those books that when I first heard of the story, I actually heard of the movie before like really knowing what was going on here. And I was like, oh, it just sounds like a romance story. But for the time that this was written and the way it reads, I do have to say it's a very slow story. So that's why I feel fall time is perfect for this. It's not like action-packed or whatever. And there's definitely a romance at heart of the story, which is why I wasn't expecting to like this at all. But in this story, we get a very strong female character. I believe her name is Bathsheba. Bathsheba, that's her name. And she, I think, has to take over the farm after her father dies, and she's like the only heir, and she takes on this job, and then she has these different suitors and like all the chitter chatter in the town, and that's sort of like the main plot. But the way it all plays out in the end, I feel is very much like more like almost mystery, like who is going to get her hand. And there are like different people vying for it, and she is a pretty headstrong woman. She knows her mind, and that's definitely for like the time period this was written in. It was a surprise to me because it wasn't like just a meek little lamb who doesn't talk back. She definitely has her opinions, and she doesn't put them away for anyone. So she's definitely a woman that was written in a time period, because this was like written in like the 1850s, I believe, that you didn't really get to see a lot. So from that perspective, I think this can still very much appeal to modern day readers. And I felt the prose in this was pretty accessible as well. It's not as like flourished as some classics can be. It is definitely more accessible. There's quite a lot of dialogue in it as well, which is, for some reason, in classics, I always find that if it's got good dialogue, I find it a lot more readable than when it's got a lot of descriptions. So that's definitely true for this one here. So yeah, it does have more of a romancy kind of vibe to it, but this is set in the English countryside. We get all the different seasons. We've got some strong, likable and unlikable characters at the same time. And I think that that really makes this a story that's very character driven and therefore very great for fall season reading. Next up, we have Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I think that Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre is like on everyone's list for a good fall read, but like not just because of the ending and how things all goes down, but I also think Jane as a character is just really good to read about in a fall setting. I don't know. She's a little down on her luck at the start of the novel for sure. She's sort of like abandoned by her, was it her aunt? And she like grows up and in this school system, and she doesn't really like it. And then in the end, she of course meets Mr. Rochester. And I feel that a lot of reviews always focus on the so-called romance between these two characters. But I've always read this as less as a romance thing and more of a, like, again, strong-headed, you know, knows her own mind kind of woman who really tries to just get ahead in life. And she just tries to make sure she gets the most out of it. And it does have a dark and gloomy sort of character to it again as well. Especially because of some of the things in the past of Mr. Rochester. And again, the way they sort of meet and how their relationship comes to be, I feel is definitely like flawed. And it has this like Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth kind of vibe to it. So again, a bit of romance. It's got some darkness. We've got a strong female character who knows her own mind, and that definitely gets her into trouble a couple of times. So I feel from that perspective, it's definitely a good one. And save for like the supposedly gothic-y elements this was written at a time where gothic elements in Victorian fiction were sort of starting to get somewhere, but it wasn't all that strongly gothic just yet. It was more like the latter half of the 19th century, and this was like written like, again, like smack in the middle, like just before it, like 1840s, isn't that? Let me check. It was published in 1847, so I was correct, 1840s. So yeah, I feel that you sort of get more of a stronger like gothic-y vibe after that. So like late 19th century, you get a lot more things like that. So this is sort of like the forebearer of those things, but it definitely has those elements in as well. And that's another reason why I enjoy it. And finally, I think if there is going to be a classic you're going to read in the fall time, not just because it's Halloween, but Dracula. And the reason why I'm recommending this as a fall read is because it's slow. This is an epistolary novel, in case you're unfamiliar with the original text. It's completely told in the form of letters, which kind of slows down the pace of the book, and it is quite chunky. Mine somehow got waterlogged, so don't know how that happened. I've had this edition for a while. Let me put it that way. And it's quite a thick, like quite dense prose. So I know that when you say Dracula, a lot of people think of all the movie adaptations that we've had, and that feels a lot more fast-paced than the book actually is. I feel that very often when Dracula is discussed, it's not discussed from the novel's perspective, but much more from the like popular culture perspective that we are so used to. So going back to the original text is not for the faint of heart. I'm not gonna lie. This is like, if you're a beginner at classics, maybe don't read this. It may put you off of reading classics for the rest of your life, because it can be a difficult read. The prose is quite sort of waffly, and it meanders quite a bit. Like the excitement that you're used to of like TV series or movies that have featured vampires or Dracula related content is just very far removed from what this book actually does. If you like a study on mankind, because that's kind of what it gives me, this works really well. You also need to be aware that this book got very hyped up, not just in our times, but also back in the day when it was released in the late 1890s, because it was very much dipping its toe into this fantastical kind of feel that was going on. So when this was published, the Victorian age was, well, not coming to a close, because Victoria would be living for a couple more years after we got the 1900s, but it was definitely sort of at a point in time where people were very afraid of the next couple of years, and then the century ends and what's going to happen. And there were all these advancements in scientific revelations, I should say, that had come out in past years before that. So there's definitely also like this religious element to the text, and this like overall feeling of what happens next. And what makes Dracula so unique in terms of like a vampire novel is because there have been many vampire stories before this that perhaps in terms of like shaping what a vampire story is, were far more important than this text is. But the brilliance of Stoker's text is that it took this mythical creature that had always been roaming medieval ruins and castles, and it was always this like far away thing, but he took it and placed it in contemporary London. And that's why this book has been very important in terms of, well, in a way you could call this the predecessor of all things urban fantasy. I think. Like, that's just my own assessment. I don't know whether any scholar would agree with me there, but I feel that this is definitely sort of like doing what I appreciate a lot about a lot of urban fantasy stories. So for me, this definitely sort of gets that. So you get this like creature, and there's all these like different things going on. And of course we have Dr. Van Helsing, who knows a little bit about these things, who is going to help these people. And it definitely is like a social critique at the same time. So when you go into this, forget anything you know about vampires, forget anything you've learned about Dracula, because we're going to get this all from the perspective of Jonathan Harker, and to be quite fair, he's not exactly the most exciting person on the planet. He's very analytical though, but also a bit naive. So that's why I think this book is a good one, but it does come with a lot of like ifs and buts who might actually like this. Classics out of the way, the next stack is going to be my 5 recommendations of like more like detective-y, spooky, paranormal, magical realism, a little bit of fantasy, dystopian thrown in. That's actually what we've got going on, yeah. So in case you don't know, I like historical fiction novels that have detective elements in them, so we've got a couple of those. I love a bit of magical realism. I like a good bit of urban fantasy, and if it has a paranormal element to it, I'm even happier. So let me get to that sort of thing first. So a book series I've never heard anybody talking about on YouTube is Lockwood & Co. by Jonathan Stroud. This is the first book in the series. There are 5 books in total, that's the entire series, and this is YA. So this is not necessarily like very difficult to read. These are very action-packed, and in case you've never heard of Lockwood & Co., this world is like an alternate universe where ghosts are real, and the only people who can see the ghosts are people under the age of 18. The older people get, the less they can see them. So a lot of these agencies have like recruited children and teenagers to take care of the problem because these ghosts aren't a good thing. And Lockwood & Co. starts like this action-packed thing where we meet the only agency, ghost hunting agency, that actually consists of teenagers. And we follow a main character called Lucy who joins this group, and that's Lockwood & Co. And the first couple of books are very much more about them becoming a team, eradicating these ghosts. But there's this underbelly as the stories grow, where you do get a storyline that already starts in the first book that is resolved in the final book. So these books do a little bit more, I feel, than your standard YA series. There's a lot of friendship in here, a little bit of romance, but it's not too romance heavy, which is what I like. We get some really strong-headed characters here as well. They are teenagers, so you do have to take that into account, and it is writing style and also typeset style quite YA-ish. But this is, you know, for a YA novel, I felt it didn't feel too young. I feel that within YA, there's a really broad spectrum of how it can feel. These are exciting stories, and especially when we get to more like the political intrigue that is part of the main storyline that connects all 5 books together, I feel the stories also feel a bit more grown up, rather than just like, let's just slash at some ghosts with our swords, you know? Gets to be a little bit more than that, which I appreciate. Another one of those books that could be, like, I did find this in the adult section of fantasy, like of a fantasy section of the bookstore, but this is T.L. Huchu's The Library of the Dead. So this is a book that I've talked about because I read it quite recently and I really like it. It's another series. It's got the second book that came out just this year, and this is set in a dystopian version of Edinburgh. So it's again like alternate universe where for some reason we don't know yet in this book what has happened, but something has happened to the world in here that makes it feel very Ready Player One to me, where, you know, cars are left on a freeway because they have all stalled and there's hardly any like resources, and people are like trying to scrape by. And our main character in the story, what's her name? Ropa. She has, in order to try and scrape by, she has dropped out of school, and she is equipped with this gift that her grandma had as well, which is the use of some Zimbabwean magic, and she can talk to ghosts. And what she does is she kind of runs errands for the ghosts. So people who have passed away hire her services to relay messages to the world of the living. And one of the dead comes up to her and says, like, my boy is missing, help me. And she's a bit like stoically, like she's a bit of an annoying teenager because she's like 14 or 15 in the stories. So that's why this kind of feels YA, but the themes in the story, especially when she starts finding out what has happened to this boy, are far darker than what we find in most YA stories, which is why I understand it's part of the adult section of the bookstore. But this is, again, very fast-paced. Ropa is, you know, your typical lovable yet unlovable character. She's very cynical, and she has, like, she's very street smart because of how the world around her is, but she definitely has a soft spot for both her grandmother and her little sister, who she tries to provide for, and at the same time she's just trying to stay afloat in this world that is just, you know, very different from what we're used to. And there's definitely like a fantastical element as well, because the title refers to a place that she goes to look for answers in the book. And then it's almost like this secret society kind of thing. So that's why this also has like a dark academia kind of vibe, which, again, as you will see to the books I still want to read, definitely goes with the vibes of things that are very popular at the moment. So if you like gritty, gray characters and like a bit of paranormal, a little bit of dystopian, a lot of banter, wittiness, yet also a really cool mystery at its heart. Well, what actually happens isn't very cool, but like the mystery itself and solving that is pretty well done here too. So it's got a lot of elements that I think go well with the fall time. I've mentioned how much I like historical fictions when they have a detective element. Alex Grecian's The Yard. Now, it's been a while since I read this, but this is set in Victorian London, and it's sort of very much feels like there was Ripper Street was a TV show that was on, I think, Amazon a couple of years ago. It had the lead actor was the same actor as who plays Mr. Darcy opposite Keira Knightley in Pride and Prejudice, in case you're wondering. That's always, like, I always remember his face, but never his name. It very much reminded me of that. Like, it has that sort of, like, you know, the foggy streets of Victorian London, and there's all these, like, cases that they need to solve. And it's sort of about the first police force that was professionally launched in England, and this mainly takes part in the east of London. In the series, because this is a, I believe, 5-part series, I never got around to finding the 5th book. I don't know what happened to it. But I did read the other 4, and there are a couple of elements in the stories I didn't end up liking as the series progressed, because there was a strong Jack the Ripper reference, and I kind of feel that's a little bit cheap. In a way, in some of the later books, the main character actually meets Jack the Ripper. I believe he's kidnapped by the guy at some point, which was my least favorite book in the series. So there's definitely something going on here that I do appreciate. In the other books, there's definitely more of a focus on just one case, and that's what we start off with in The Yard. So I really like this, and it's just a really good, like, dark, gritty detective story. And, you know, that's why I liked it. Like, historical fiction set in Victorian London, and where the atmosphere of historical London is definitely part of it, like with all the factories and the shouting and like the slums and all those things I usually like. And I thought I could talk about this because I haven't thought of this book in a while, and I'm like, maybe I should reread that at some point. And then in a similar vein, but set in Victorian Edinburgh, I've mentioned this book series a lot as well. I believe the final book is now out. I still have to read it, but this is The Strings of Murder by Oscar de Muriel, and this is the Frey and Maurier series. This series features Frey, who is somehow becoming disgraced as a police constable in London, and therefore he is sent up to Edinburgh, and there he is put in the lowest of the low divisions. It's the laughing stock of everyone at the police department in Edinburgh, but it's run by Maurier. And Maurier believes in the paranormal. His sister has gone a little cuckoo, and he believes it's like the devil and witchcraft, and he believes in all the folklore stories, whereas Frey is very cynical and is like, nah, not gonna happen. Together, they have to work together and solve the mystery at the same time. There's like a different case every book, and they always start with like, it's probably something paranormal, and then it turns out that there's some recent, as in Victorian era recent, scientific revelation, a scientific discovery that was made at the time that the author has used to solve the case. So there's always like a real world explanation for everything that I've really liked about these stories, because it teaches you a bit of history at the same time, which I enjoy. But it also has like Sherlock Holmes and Watson kind of banter between the two main characters. So there's that. There's the paranormal, spooky sort of element as well. It's set in Victorian era Edinburgh, and at the same time we always get a cool mystery at the heart as well. So it's got a lot of elements that I love. And finally, in this section, we have The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. And this book, it's a little bit of a strange one. It's sort of, it's this like concept of reliving the same day every single time. So this person wakes up in a different body every single time, and he has to solve the murder of Evelyn Hardcastle. So she's gonna die 7 times. But at the same time, as he is waking up, there are other characters that are being introduced, and it all seems to be a little bit darker than you think at first. Like, this starts like a cozy mystery thriller kind of thing, like a whodunit, your classic whodunit. But there is a more magical realism sort of element to it that's a little bit Hunger Gamesy. So for me, this was fun. The main character, though, is a little bit of a, I don't know, goody two-shoes. So that to me is a bit, and he sort of very much also critiques the bodies he wakes up in, because he does meet these people when he is in certain bodies. And so he already has an opinion of them, and then he wakes up in this body and it's like, oh no, not this guy. I'm never gonna solve it. So in terms of like what this story does, again, it's been a few years since I read it, but I really enjoyed it at the time. It's quite fast paced, and it's a bit like solving a puzzle, and that's what I enjoyed about this one. Woo. And our final stacks are books I still have to read. Some of these I bought quite recently. Some of these I've bought a while ago. But I was mentioning Edgar Allan Poe, Fall of the House of Usher, and when I read the blurb of Gallant by V.E. Schwab at my local bookstore, it was giving me Fall of House of Usher vibes. It seems to be, I don't know exactly what this is about, but it sort of feels like the house is almost like a character in the story as well. At least that's the vibe I got from, you know, reading the blurb on the back. And it also has that house on the front. So I think I might like this. I hope it's like, here the blurb on the back says, haunting and beautifully tilled gardens of darkness. I don't know. That sounded intriguing. I think it's very fall-like. Then I was mentioning Dracula in my classic sections of the video, but Empire of the Vampire by J. Kristoff. I've now finished his Nevernight cycle. So I bet I read both God's Grave and Dark Dawn over the summertime, and even though those books are also quite chunky, like this one, his writing style is so incredibly accessible in terms of, you know, reading pace. It's very fast-paced reading. So even though this is like, what, 700 and something pages? Yeah, it is. I do feel that I think that with something like this, I can race through it in like a day or two. And that's what I'm hoping for. So if it's like a fast-paced read that I'm looking for, even though the size of this is just incredibly intimidating. But yeah, this book I don't know anything about. It's about vampires. And that's all I needed to do for it to give you as a fall recommendation, really. But yeah, this is definitely something that I think I might enjoy. And then another Daphne du Maurier, Rebecca by her, which is, I think, her best-selling novel. It's one of the very few books that ever since it was published, it has never gone out of print. And this is, of course, also a Netflix adaptation, which I did watch. So I now have a better sense of the story. I started reading it a couple of years ago, but I sort of stopped when they were still in the south of France, like right before she moved in with him. And that just made it feel a bit, I was like hoping for it to feel like Jamaica in, but because we start the story in like sunny south of France, and now that I've seen the movie adaptation, I know that I just need to get through that part. And because I now have a vague idea of what the story is gonna do, I know I can just pick it up where they're doing like, I think I left it after them just having a car ride and then coming back at the hotel. So that's, I know where I was like roughly left. So if I pick it up there, I can start reading this again. And this is like your OG kind of like big manor, isolated situation, people going crazy kind of story. So I think that that's very fall-ish. It's just that for me, I didn't get the fall vibe straight away as I was reading this. But now that I know what this is roughly going to do, I think I might enjoy going back to it. And I love myself a bit of Daphne du Maurier. And then I think two booktube, book talk favorites when it comes to like dark academia, fall vibes. I think this is popping up in a lot of people's recommendations. If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio and The Atlas Six by Olivia Blake. And these are both stories that are deemed like really good dark academia kind of stories. And I kind of like the idea of dark academia, but so far, I mean, I read Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, which everybody's saying, oh, it's like a dark academia. It's only hyped up because it's classified as dark academia. It's like Twilight all over again, or Shadowhunters, or whoever. Like, there are these waves of things that are very popular, and then everything gets labeled as it. But is it really truly part of the core of what the aesthetic or the trend is trying to do? So I'm hoping to have better luck with these two. I know that this is like about 6 people, magicians, who are trying to get into the Library of Alexandria, like a secret society kind of thing. And here, I believe it's about like a group of people and someone ends up dead and they are somehow all responsible for it. So yeah, I just know that I think this has a murder at the heart of it, and this is more like a secret society kind of thing at the heart of it. So I hope that these are like better for me. The guy at my bookstore when I picked this one up said, oh, I really like that a lot more than I thought I was going to. So he said the hype is real. So I'm hoping I'm going to like these. I think that I'm currently in the midst of still reading a book which I actually want to finish reading before I do a wrap up of everything I read over the like July, August, and September, even though we're technically already in October, but it's not going as fast as I thought it was going to be, so that's a bit of a shame. But I think this is going to be the next on the the reading pile, so that's going to be my next read, because after this I just need something a bit more light-hearted and something that's faster paced, because I'm currently reading Circe by Madeline Miller, and I've heard so many people raving about Madeline Miller books, and I'm not sure I'm on the same bandwagon as everybody else. So far I'm liking it, but I'm not sure. I'm just not really connecting to the story, I think. So, but yeah, I'll give you my full thoughts when I do my wrap up, I think in 2 weeks time or so. So that's definitely going to be a book that I hope to be able to review for you soon. And then hopefully I can add this one to a fall read. So that's it. There you have it. Those were all of the books that I wanted to recommend to you, and like an overview of like different fall stories that I think are great for giving you all the cozy fall vibes. Definitely let me know your recommendations in a comment down below. Maybe I have those sitting on my shelves and it might give me ideas of what I want to read next. Maybe I'm gonna not read the Atlas Six just yet. But we'll see. Thank you so very much for joining me today. Thumbs up the video if you liked it. Subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more by me. I make a video once a week on here, not just about books. I'm going to be trickling in some lifestyle and fashion related content here as well, because I've decided that this is going to be the channel where everything is going to go that is not makeup related. So I hope you would like to stay tuned for more, and I hope to see my next video. Bye bye!